G'day, my name is Golembiewski and today I'm teaching constructive drawing for architecture students. I want to start by destroying the myth of talent. Drawing is a skill, it's not something that you're born with. Actually, it's not even something that requires masses of time to practice. It's a skill that's easy to learn and well worth the effort if you're a designer because it's an essential skill and it'll be useful forever. Okay, on with the lesson. All objects have volume and mass. When you draw an object, you're representing its three-dimensional form in 2 dimensions. The method that we will use was cognized during the early Renaissance, and it's called perspective drawing. The old masters used to use perspective to reconstruct a 3-dimensional reality into a 2-dimensional representation. They didn't try to translate their vision directly into an image on paper. They treated what they saw as information, with which they could enrich their drawings. For the old masters, the difference between drawing from reality and drawing from imagination is only where the information comes from, the reality or from the mind. In either case, the technique of drawing is exactly the same. Perspective drawings have 1, 2, or 3 vanishing points. These are theoretical endpoints of a given axis, the point where the parallax distortion is infinitely minimized. There are 2 vanishing points for each axis. With the x and z axes, one is in front of you and the other one behind your head. The y-axis has one up in the sky and the other deep underground. Effectively, there are just 3 visible vanishing points. Here's an example of single point perspective. See how the foreshortened side recedes to a single point which is off the page. The x-axis is represented here without perspective. The lines that run from left to right are absolutely parallel. Most constructed drawings use a 2-point perspective. Usually the axes that are foreshortened are the z and x axes. Here Palladio uses a 2-point perspective. The y-axis is parallel. Most of the great draftsmen use a 2-point perspective, except, of course, where only one is called for. We'll talk about that a little bit later. I want to bring your attention to something else here. See that Palladio uses only one light source and a single tone of shade. Palladio also only uses cast light shadows twice in this very complex drawing, and in both cases he uses it very specifically to clarify which elements jut forward. Otherwise, he just avoids cast shadows, and I suggest you do the same. Keep the light simple. These drawings from the 20s by Hugh Ferris are 2-point perspectives. At first glance they look like 3-point perspectives. They have all those telltale signs, like the worm eye viewpoint, but closer analysis shows that the y-axis is parallel. The y-axis lines will never converge. Okay, here's the 3-point perspective. All the axes, x, y, and z converge. Note that you must take a worm's eye or a bird's eye view with this perspective style, because the moment that the eye is over the horizon, then a kind of distortion occurs under the eye height. As the building recedes, going away from you, it actually gets bigger rather than smaller, as it should. I had a quick look for some great 3-point perspective drawings, but actually they're not common. This one is done by an anonymous drawing student. It has a few mistakes. One is that the building continues to widen as it recedes beyond eye level. The other is to do with light. It's that there are 2 shades of shadow. Just mapping masses with perspective makes blocks. These are the basic volumes of all 3D objects, which you will be representing. Now all compositions, even the most dynamic ones, can be abstracted into blocks, just like these. Here Cambiaso, a late Renaissance artist, uses blocks to represent figures tumbling. Blocks are easy to imagine and draw. They're also very easy to light, because there's no question about where the light falls. Here Michelangelo, one of the greatest artists ever, uses blocks just like Cambiaso's to represent feet. Even Michelangelo uses the very same constructive method to draw. So here we start with your drawing. Some of my students have been drawing James Barnett's neoclassical General Post Office in Sydney. Here I will do the same. I choose what I want to show. In this case, the GPO was built in a narrow lane that was only later expanded to become Martin Place, a piazza. I want to see what the GPO may have looked like at the time it was built. Because I want to show the whole north face of the GPO facing into this very narrow lane, I want a vanishing point which is going to be visible within that lane. So that vanishing point will end just beyond the end of the lane. Because the vanishing point will be central, I have to use a one-point perspective. If I don't, I'll get all kinds of distortion. Once we've masked the building, well, more or less, we have to find out where the middle of the foreshortened face is. If we draw a diagonal line across the face from one corner to the other, and then another diagonal line from the opposite corners, they intersect in exactly the middle. Using this technique, we can divide the face into quarters, eighths, sixteenths, etc. The proportion foreshortened face can now be matched to the information from the real three-dimensional object that we're drawing. The middle of the object will match the middle of the face. Features in the middle of the object will be drawn from the optical middle of the foreshortened face. It's quite simple. Once you start looking at where the features are, you'll probably find the volume you've drawn is wrong. So, now is the best time to make changes. You have to cut the shape and add to it. Punch out holes and add bits according to what you see. The GPO had a later renovation by Walter Liberty Vernon. I do not want to draw that, so I actually cut it out now. I just don't draw it. I see it obviously, but I don't draw it. It's not a good time to fuss about details. At this point, you want to put some basic things in, guiding points, but you don't want to put any detail in. All I want to really do is concentrate on the basic form. Now is finally the time to shade. Remember Palladio's lesson in the other section of this video. Use only one shade of shadow and leave one shade of light. Okay, if you want to color the light, that's okay. Use a darker color for shadow. That's fine, but just use one shade for each. Now simply shade the shaded areas. It's that simple. Here I use coffee to shade it. Now you might want to use coffee or tea or watercolor or ink or whatever you've got. That's all. Sugar and milk's fine as well. Once you shade wash, you might want to wait till the paper's dry, depending on your technique, and then you finally add details. Now be careful not to over detail. Your tool, your pencil, your Conte, whatever you're using, will ask for a certain level of detail. Use something that's appropriate to that tool. If it's a blunt instrument, you put only a little bit of detail. Once your shade wash is dry, or dry enough to draw, finally add that detail, and don't over detail it. Use the proportions that you've established earlier so that you know where the bits that you're drawing should go. Finish off by adding a sky, a streetscape, etc. The same technique can be used to draw anything: humans, horses, mountains. Here, George Bridgeman draws heads, arms and legs. Just take a look at how his blocks are softened to make beautiful limbs. For further information, I recommend any book by him. That's George Bridgeman once again. You might also want to look at Robert Beverly Hale. This video was produced by my son, Rishi Golembiewski, 14 years old, and written by myself.